you very much for inviting me to participate in this debate. And of course, it is an interesting question, and one that is not necessarily so obvious, but also sometimes it's extremely obvious. Let me just start by saying that the regrettable split between tangible and intangible heritage specializations and indeed cultural diversity which results from these definitions really needs to be brought to an end. Just as many tangible places owe their importance to intangible values, so too many aspects of intangible heritage are grounded in specific places and cannot survive without them. The conjunction and the artificial divide between tangible and intangible both challenges and calls to attention the need for policies which address the chasm that opens up between these two definitions of heritage. And of course, these are not the only two, but these are the principal ones I will concern myself with today. And it's a place where logic and experience tells us that important heritage values will disappear into voids left by such a fragmented approach. So it's the approach that I want to discuss today. And what resonates are these inherent tensions of negotiating and valuing heritage as distinct from highly critical generation of heritage indicators and statistics almost that others have talked about, and I won't go into detail here, but which have yet to provide convincing evidence of heritage as a driver of sustainable development and as an opportunity rather than an obstacle to such processes. And this is what we have to deal with, ladies and gentlemen. Critical to the development of such a framework is the need to acknowledge culture as a dynamic system rather than as a reified compilation of resources in applying the heritage concepts. On the whole, member states have tended to organize their heritage system to segregate rather than to integrate tangible and intangible heritage values. UNESCO's decision to adopt separate conventions and bureaucracies should not necessarily encourage these dichotomies, but rather should provide direct examples as to how to ensure collaboration and conjunction at the same time. And the failure to link the safeguarding of intangible heritage to the protection of places has meant that national and local conservation policies are generally ineffective at safeguarding the intangible heritage values of places as well as the places themselves. This can be addressed, and we've seen other examples. We've seen some specific examples where this happens successfully, not least Montreal. But there's still a need, a compelling need for policy frameworks that put people at the center of this process. To develop them, heritage experts will need to look beyond the kind of cultural manifestations favored by tourism and focus instead on ordinary, everyday human experiences and places. So instead of framing and exhibiting heritage resources like masterworks, heritage programs should pay more attention to the social, cultural, and not least spatial context of these phenomena. Instead of framing and exhibiting these, they need to safeguard the ordinary, quotidian, nameless, unremarked, and unremarkable. Recognition is just the first of several challenges. It's a crucial intersection between people and places, the tangible and the intangible, which appears to be considered antithetical to the consistency demanded by officials who must invest their decision-making in order to maintain legitimacy. This almost reduces a multivocal conversation to a two-sided confrontation, and at worst implies that the solution must be at best an uneasy truce between opposing forces. What we should expect is that instead of people, community versus experts, it's rather a diversity of perspectives, each with its own kind of expertise, which is equally respected in this process. The pressures of disciplinary specialization and the administrative imperative to sort and catalog things into heritage lists is one of the issues that need to be addressed. Mass tourism is another. The tourism industry doesn't really care whether residents reject such sloganeering as an oversimplified picture of their heritage, because really tourism is for outsiders. That is the point, really. So tourism-driven heritage conservation will generally simplify the intangible heritage, overemphasizing the unusual and the exportable at the expense of the ordinary and domestic. So whereas the goal of conservation is to safeguard the heritage, not the tourism industry, not the heritage tourism industry. I think we need to remember this. The goal of conservation is to safeguard the heritage, from which we can then advance tourism. Another aspect which was touched on by one of my colleagues here is that culture is an ever-evolving manifestation of a spirit of community, given its purpose and identity as a living collective organism. The sustainable development of any community must therefore endeavor to preserve the process of cultural transmission in parallel with material progress to ensure that the spirit of the community survives. I want to touch here on something that's very special to me and which has not yet been raised in this agenda. The introduction of cultural heritage in the sustainable development debate is of course especially crucial for small island developing states. And I want to quote directly from the Barbados Programme of Action that the survival of small islands developing states is firmly rooted in their human resources and cultural heritage, which are their most significant assets. Those assets are under severe stress, and all efforts must be taken to ensure the central position of people in the process of sustainable development. And this was reinforced by the Mauritius strategy in 2004, which outlined concrete steps for further implementation of this Barbados Programme of Action and more. Now, if we want to look at what are the ways in which, what are the concrete terms in which cultural heritage should be integrated into the post-2015 development agenda, I totally agree with what one of our colleagues is saying in terms of the need to address the economic framework through which lens heritage is looked at. At this point in time, and despite successful models, we have not been able to generate the kind of economic data which really satisfies the financial arrangements of both national and international bodies. And this is a key component that has to be addressed. I totally agree with the need, with the way in which others have expressed that the basis of heritage is to satisfy the community's source of identity, sustainability, well-being, and all of these things. But in terms of getting heritage into the post-2015 development agenda, we need to look at what the models have been in terms of our environmental and ecological resources. How have those models been able to be centralized in the focus, in the lens of economic development, but in a way that heritage has not? And can one argue that one is necessarily more important or more central to these processes than the other? So I think that in order to do this, we need to pay attention to the narratives expressed through people's customs, stories, memories, which can give heritage professionals invaluable insights into the psychological bonds that people form with these places, and that with time come to define their heritage values. Responsibility for tangible and intangible heritage must be brought together within the same agencies. Often they are not, and this split that I referred to earlier is part of what keeps fragmenting the picture of what heritage can contribute to the successful economic and sustainable development agenda. But these agencies must be open not only to these heritage values, bringing these heritage values together, but also a more democratic participation in defining them. They can play an essential role in safeguarding intangible heritage, not by departing from the commitment to protect places, but by devoting more attention to understanding and protecting the kinds of places that form the essential cradle, the hearth, the habitat of humanity. For SIDS, there's a clear and mutually reinforcing link between cultural heritage and sustainable development. Not only is cultural heritage a important keystone in the sustainable development of these countries, but the threat of unsustainable practices on their cultural heritage is magnified manifold due to their relatively small size. In this sense, climate change will have a direct and grave impact on the cultural life of these communities. Rising sea levels, gradual salinization of arable land, and intensifying weather patterns such as hurricanes are forcing these communities to adapt in ways that deepen their vulnerability of their respective cultural identities. So these environmental impacts are directly shifting and changing the heritage perspectives of these communities. And we have to recognize that and acknowledge it. The introduction of culture in the sustainable development debate at the international level is therefore crucial for protecting human rights. And that's not a subject that we have addressed in this panel, but was addressed on the first day. We need to look at how heritage contributes to the human rights basis on which communities participate in the sustainable development approach by looking at ways in which social, cultural, and economic environments become conducive to the emergence, evolution, and sustainability of cultural industries that are unique within the local market, having been generated by heritage. Heritage is a source and a fundamental underpinning of the creative economy, the cultural industries, and can lend themselves to that process of continual generation of new ideas and new products. If we were to speak purely in economic terms, the comparative advantage offered by World Heritage Sites and cultural heritage is not to transpose international brands to countries, but to use these elements as platforms to launch unique brands based on the diversity of cultural products that are able to compete in their own right at the international market. The success of such a model has the potential to create long-term and perpetually adapting sources of wealth for local communities. Last part. So equally emblematic, I have a lot to say, come on. Equally emblematic of the current discourse is the insistence that universalizing concepts must be tempered with local needs and interests. These conclusions are very much in line with the assertion that conservation of heritage sites and the promotion of related intangible cultural heritage could provide a sound and sustainable platform for economic growth, social transformation, and environmental protection. As such, it's important to ensure that developmental policies at global and national levels consider and invest in heritage assets, and to explore how the mechanisms of the conventions that we have been talking about could adapt to a rapidly changing world and contribute to the realization of the SDGs. Ultimately, what we need to be cognizant of is the distinction between the processes of heritage conservation and heritization. Sorry, really hard. Thinking about a lot. So what we need to recognize is the distinction between the processes of conservation, heritage-wise, and heritagization, which is not the same thing. We need to be aware of those. Thank you very much.